All right, all right, all right. So, thank you everybody who is tuning in as a replay. Today, I am joined by mine and Megan's good friend and online coaching client, Eric. Eric, how are you doing today, brother?
I am doing well, doing very well.
Good. Happy to hear that. Happy to see you, man. So,
Yeah, always good to see you and Megan.
yeah, absolutely. So, today's intention for those watching is every so often we like to do what we call a client spotlight interview. And the intention behind these interviews is to, one, celebrate the incredible progress that our clients are making, but in addition to that, help normalize some deeper conversations around what kinds of progress they actually had. Because if you have been a part of our world in any way, shape, or form, you probably already know that there's way more progress to be had than just your weight loss and just, some of the vanity, more performance-based metrics that the mainstream media, or excuse me, mainstream fitness industry tends to impose on us. So really, really excited to share Eric's journey and his experience with us and what, his big takeaways are. So Eric, if you don't mind, lead us off, man. Give us some background as far as what your life is like, what your world was like prior to working with us, and what you're currently up to now.
Yeah, so some background information about what my life was like prior to starting with you all, and then I'll talk a little bit about where I am now. So um, you and I connected, Patrick, I guess really only a little more than a year ago, although I got to tell you, it seems way longer than that in a
Right.
good way. And originally I had reached out to you. I'd been following you on Facebook for a while. I had a family member who I'm pretty sure had worked with you more back when you were doing your traditional gym kind of
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah, in person.
Um, but again, that was how I became aware of you. So as a little bit of background for me, I'm 62 years old, and I have been a an athlete, or certainly active, depending on how you want to define that, pretty much my entire life. So I was a competitive swimmer throughout my youth and into high school. I was a runner after graduating from high school. Had been involved in, just kind of a lot of activities, some of them at a fairly competitive level, some definitely at a more amateur kind of level. And so I have that as a background across all my life. However, it's important to note that that was also punctuated by some pretty big periods of inactivity,
Okay.
in particular, when, life got hectic, whether it was, super busy at school or super busy with family or super busy with work. And so, despite having a long history of really enjoying being physically active, I also had times where I gained a lot of weight. Um, I had sustained a number of injuries over the years that had presented some pretty significant obstacles. And in fact, ultimately, I had a knee replacement surgery a couple of years ago. Uh, and so was facing these kinds of challenges. And then during COVID, like I think a lot of us, became very socially isolated.
Yeah.
Also, at the time, I was living in California, and I appreciate that about the state. They took very seriously the COVID restrictions, but it also meant that, even there was a period where even just being outside of your house
Mhm.
without like a really good reason was not really encouraged, and certainly gyms and all those kinds of things were closed. And so the good thing about my background is that I'm used to working out. I'm used to working out hard. I'm used to working toward goals. Done a variety of activities. The not so good thing is I definitely fell into that classic pattern of, well, if I'm going to work out, I got to go to the gym for at least an hour.
Right.
And anything that's less than that doesn't count. And have a lot of rigid conceptualizations about what counts as activity, what counts as a workout. And then on the nutrition end, a lot of yo-yo dieting across my lifetime. And one of the big challenges that I faced was significant emotional eating,
Okay.
to deal with stress and all that. Um, where I am now, again, in the time that we have worked together, I feel like I've made just huge progress in terms of really thinking more about sustainable lifestyle goals, both with physical activity and with nutrition. As I mentioned, I'm 62. And so one of the things that kind of drove me in seeking you out was realizing that my lifestyle was not supporting me being able to sustain being super physically active as I got older.
Right.
And so that was a big challenge that I faced, and in the work with you and Megan, I think have made a lot of progress.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, and we would agree, and we continue to applaud you. And it's a very common theme with the clients that we work with that have the greatest amount of success is there's a willingness to be open-minded, right? And
Yeah,
the
definitely.
fact that you've continued to stay open to the journey and having a what we call like a beginner's mindset, it just makes things way more fun in the long run because then it allows us to find maybe missing, and I'm sure you can speak to this as well, like getting like you're talking about this primary theme of consistency, right? To where it's like you've
Hmm.
got, and this is where it's very common with most individuals in our free fitness community and individuals that Megan and I speak with is like they understand that the roadblock to get to where they want to go is consistency. And then they
Right.
also have this under how do I want to put it? They've got this basic understanding of what it was like at a younger age to enjoy movement,
Yeah.
right? They
Yeah.
were they were former athletes. We were all former kids, hopefully current kids in some ways, in knowing what it's like to play and move their bodies. And there's unfortunately, to your point earlier, like there are these conceptually rigid paradigms that have been imposed on many of us, one of which being your workout needs to be this particular way and this length in order for it to be valid on top of what's so pervasive in our culture, excuse me, at large is getting older is synonymous with your health falling off track, right? You have all these other
Right.
life obligations, you have work, all that kind of stuff. So you came into this with a really great level of awareness of the problem, and it's been really fun in working with you and building very simple, basic elements that you can reintroduce into your journey to help with stuff like the lack of consistency and the emotional eating, all these other things you had brought up. So,
Hmm.
if you don't mind, what's been really cool, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more context around our time working with one another, because there's been this very consistent theme and thread in your case in that you do a substantial amount of traveling,
Yeah.
right? You do, and that's another conceptual rigid framework that people deal with is they believe that traveling is synonymous with falling off track, especially when it's through the
Oh,
lens of
yeah.
yeah, especially when it's through the lens of like vacation, right? Where you weren't necessarily traveling a lot for vacation, it was more for work related obligations. But throughout
Right.
the year we've worked together, your travel hasn't changed really. In some ways, it's almost increased in frequency
Oh,
for the
yeah.
so if you don't
Yeah.
mind, would love to hear your thoughts as far as how that has played into helping make those mental frameworks and conceptions around eating exercise a little bit more pliable and flexible for you in order to increase your consistency.
Yeah. So I think your question about where does travel fit into the process that we've worked on is a really great one to highlight. And it also it shines a light on a much broader set of just assumptions I was making in a lot of different ways. So just as a little more background, I can really see, for example, when I was running, and I'm hoping to actually get back to that. That's one of the things you and I are working on. But when I was running, I was totally driven by what the athletic goal was, like training for a marathon or
Mhm.
whatever, completely failing to listen to my body. And I think that because I was so focused on what the rule was,
Right.
I ultimately developed some, really significant injuries that kind of, well, not kind of, completely waylaid me on that. And so I think the travel becomes another example with that. So, like when you and I started working together, I was doing a fair amount of travel, and like you said, it's almost all for work, a little bit for personal stuff, but mostly for work. And I was falling into this pattern of, well, when you travel, you throw your nutritional approach out the window. You pack your clothes for the gym, but of course you never actually go to the gym. And also this idea that, oh, well, travel is special.
Mhm.
So I can drink whatever I want, I can eat whatever I want, when that turns out not to be the case, especially when you're traveling a lot for work.
Right.
And so part of the work that we were doing together was getting me to step back and to recognize that no, travel's not a special occasion. Travel's actually part of my life,
Yeah.
which means that if I want a life that supports consistent, sustainable goals, I can't be throwing those things out the window. So that was like one of the first things uh, with travel. And then uh, more recently, like within the last, I guess, 5 months now, something like that, my travel increased a lot. And this was a time when I had talked to you about, I really wanted 2024 to be a time was training for long distance bike rides and events. And I really wanted this to be the year that I was like cranking it up a notch and pushing aerobic capacity and strength training and all this. And my travel completely disrupted that. In the past, I would have said, well, I guess that's that, and pretty much discontinued all activity,
Mhm.
both because, well, if I can't achieve that goal, then why am I doing anything? But then also because of these rigid definitions on what a
Right.
workout was. But because of the work like that you and I had done around physical activity, I was really able to step back and say, okay, if that's not the goal anymore, then what does become the goal? And again, really rethinking my commitment not to a specific athletic event, but my commitment to a sustainable lifestyle.
Bingo.
And that is what led to what, for me anyway, was both a kind of a big aha and a big shift in my athletic goals for the year.
Yeah.
And again, it was through the work that I did with you and with Megan that I was able to make that transition without completely falling off track. And I am genuinely excited about my new goal.
Yeah.
So, didn't fall off the wagon, didn't fall into, depression about it, was able to really effectively pivot.
100%, man. And it's all really relevant stuff that it's that nuance, it's that gift of the gray area type stuff, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I'm speaking for myself and Megan as well, like most of us have had to go through trying the all or nothing black and white stuff in
Hmm.
order to get to the gray area. But what you're talking about that's so powerful is there's this healthier relationship being established with the entire journey, both short term and long term. You touched
Yeah.
on being able to build a healthy lifestyle that serves as the foundation, right? And we'll
Hmm.
use the last few months as an example where the last few months in addition, or excuse me, in conjunction with your own historical patterns of like, okay, I want to compete in this
Right.
event and I'm going to push myself super hard to compete in the event, even if it's to the detriment of my short term and maybe long term well being with injuries and stuff like that. So a lot
Oh
of it is
yeah, totally.
yeah, so a lot of this is a piecing those all of those elements together because they're valid to where it's like now what I hear you talking about is you're in a stage where you're living and existing within what we call a higher low. Like your baseline is a really, really healthy lifestyle. And what that allows you to
Right.
do in relation to the season of life you're in, where you are traveling so much to where being able to stay as consistent as what would be necessary to compete in a more like I
Mm-hmm.
you like riding in centuries, you like doing distance endurance biking, and I'm sure you're going to want to delve into it with running as well, and being able to listen to your body and acknowledge like, man, if I push myself hard right now in conjunction with the amount of physical, mental, emotional demand that's being asked of me with my work and the
Yeah.
travel that involves, this actually may not be the best season for me to do this. And that's something most people don't talk a lot about as a form of progress, right? Like being able to
Oh
know
yeah.
when to pump the brakes, but also knowing that pumping the brakes does not inherently mean, or it's not synonymous with saying, screw it, throwing our hands up and everything falling to the floor. Because that's what's going to be really cool for you when the window of time does open up to dial things up. It starts to become a way more seamless and fun transition into higher
Mm-hmm.
intensity exercise, maybe more of a regimented diet, whatever that looks like for you. That
Yeah.
transition in and out becomes way more fun. It's the difference between being able to hang out at like a cruise control of wherever it might be, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour and being able to toggle up to, you know,
Uh-huh.
70, 80 miles an hour and then coming back down, but never having to worry about, oh, I'm going back to zero. And then I've got this big event that we all know that you enjoy doing, but in order to get there, it feels like you're having to climb up a
Oh
day
yeah.
from scratch.
Well, and here's one of the really cool things for me. And again, I think it is directly from the work I have done with you all. And that is so I'm experimenting with getting back to running. And
Mhm.
like we've talked about, I'm doing this in a way I've never done before. Like I am literally my plan is to spend like the next 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, now we're probably 4 to 6 weeks laying the foundation for that. Like I am not running at all. I am stretching, I'm strength training, I'm doing elliptical, I'm getting sports massages. And going into this, I'm seeing it as an experiment that may not work. So
Yep.
I am completely prepared to try to get back into running and be like, no, I can't. And then the other thing I'm prepared for is like, I really want to listen to my body. And so
Mhm.
if my body is like, hey, cool, you're doing 10Ks, that's awesome. But maybe my body will be like, nah, you're doing 5Ks. Or
Sure.
maybe it'll be like, yeah, you can build back to half marathons. And again, it's a whole change of mind in how I'm approaching this, with a key thing being listening to what my body says. And
Right.
I can guarantee you, as recently as a year ago, I mean, probably as recently as 6 months ago, that would not really have been my approach.
Right.
And so this is, I mean, again, for me, it's delightful to,
Yeah.
to be taking on this whole new attitude. And it's because of the work we've done together.
Yeah, man, it's been a ton of fun because it's a testament to you continuing to stay open and us working together and how can we make this process fun, especially during the seasons of life where maybe the old
Yeah.
version of you would have a tendency to come up and be like, oh, this is when I say screw it and I'm going to stop. But how can we
Yeah.
find something in the middle to keep you moving and keep you in a resourceful state of mind? Because whether it's a bad day, a bad week, or a difficult month
Uh-huh.
or series of months, we've got to learn the art of being present and we've got to learn the art of being able to pivot. And that's what I hear a lot of you or a lot of what you're talking about, right? So to
Well, and I
provide,
love that phrase, forceful state of mind. You may have said that to me before, and I just never really picked up on it, but I'm really hearing that right now.
It's true. And especially relative to what is so unique about your journey, whether, someone listens to this and they travel primarily for vacation, or they do travel primarily for work, like that's, thinking back to when I was first training people and doing in-person coaching, anybody that I would work with, when they went on vacation, just hearing the dialogue and the limiting beliefs
Uh-huh.
around traveling was crazy, right? Where it was very all or nothing, black and white thinking. And to know that you're in a much healthier space where thinking, and this ties into the emotional eating stuff we've talked about as well, where like you can plan for the trip and not have it trigger nearly
Mm-hmm.
as much anxiety around like, oh crap, I'm not going to be able to do the very strict diet or strict workout routine, which then leads to typically an emotional response around eating. So then we're going through this
Definitely.
guilt shame cycle of overeating, feeling guilty about it, feeling like we have to make up for it with extra long bouts of high intensity, like the whole drill.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's cool that like it just allows you to be more fluid, and it allows you to pivot, that's what we want, because at the end of the day, your health doesn't leave you, whether you're traveling for work or for fun, or you're at home at your home base for a long period of time. So it's it's really refreshing, man. And I hope that this helps resonate with individuals that have struggled with inconsistency for a long period of time and emotional eating, much like you have, worked through and conquered in many ways. So to give people context around this kind of process of how we gauge progress, right? Like, understandably so, most people are wanting to build consistency, improve not only their physical capabilities, but also the conventional stuff, right? Like lose weight, which is very, very prevalent in the mainstream fitness industry. But obviously, we're spending a lot of our time today talking about the multiple other dimensions, or what I would
Mm-hmm.
call the root system that actually leads to those external results that people want, right? So to give people context as to, Eric's progress that he's made, he's had a 50% increase in exercise consistency, a 60% increase in his healthy eating consistency, a 20% increase or improvement in his relationship with food, a 40% improvement in his self-image. So though, to give people context, though, that's like best way to look at it. It's the difference between taking an inside out approach or an outside in approach. And it sounds very much like, Eric, you've leaned into an inside out approach where it's like, well, before we're
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
plant the garden, let's assess the soil. And then when the soil is the way we want it, we plant the seed, and then we continue to water and nurture the seed so the right food or vegetation, whatever you're growing, grows, right? And then you have something that's sustainable. So what we're talking a lot about here, Eric, definitely, much like you said, flies in the face of a lot of what you have heard in the past and what many people hear is quote unquote necessary to get to where they want to go with their health. So, from your experience, why did you choose to join Megan and I in Aware Fitness Coaching over, say, like any other program specifically?
Yeah. So, really good question. Like, why did I join you all? Why did I start with you and Megan? So, like I said, on one level, it was like, oh, I have a connection to this person.
Sure.
However, what really resonated with me, so as some background, I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm a behavioral scientist, and I've worked in academia, I've worked in the federal government, I've worked in the private sector, and now I'm in the nonprofit space. But for me, one of the things that both really rang true, and I'm not going to say, oh, but I was doing this stuff already, because the answer is I wasn't. But the ideas of mindfulness, the ideas of developing understanding of core values and then aligning your life to live with those values, the ideas of reducing rule-governed behavior and listening to your body, across all kinds of contexts. Um, developing a more flexible definition of what counted. I mean, these were all concepts that, again, aligned with a lot of what I understood about behavior in general. And as a psychologist, both within my clinical work and my research work. However, I would say they were not necessarily reflective of the approach I was using to these
Mm,
issues. And so even though I knew this stuff, it was only with working with you guys. And again, part of my attraction was, oh, I like these ideas. But it was working with you all that I stepped back and really started, well, am I using those approaches for my activity, for my exercise? Am I using those approaches for my nutrition?
sure.
And so again, that was both what attracted me to the y'all's program, and I think it was such a good fit in kind of like, well, I wouldn't say taking a harsh look at myself, but really looking in the mirror
Right.
and going, you're not doing these things. And
Right.
then working with you all, it's like, okay, now, and I'm a long way to go still, but I am doing these things much more consistently than I was across any of my life in terms of activity and nutrition.
100%, man. Love that. Like you're talking about, there's a few things that come to mind relative to what you just shared there, right? Because in order to establish any amount of true, long-lasting, sustainable change, we have to build awareness around it. To where in many cases you
Right.
have that awareness, right? Yeah, there's always that conceptual awareness as well as being able to identify where the gaps lie in, say, our current inability to integrate those things. And the key
Mm-hmm.
distinction there is what kind of conversation are we having with ourselves while we're integrating that change that ultimately results in an identity shift, right? Because
Uh-huh.
you're talking about an entire lifestyle changing to support the things that you want to do long term. You love to ride your bike, you love to move your body, and you want to make sure
Yeah.
that you're able to have as consistent and reliable access to those things as possible. And that can't realistically be done without some sort of a customizable, malleable, redefinable approach that allows you to have that identity shift, but in a way that still continues to plant seeds of compassionate, graceful dialogue, not only with your coach, but with yourself. So that way
Yeah.
that's part of the foundation for you. So as you make those pivots, you're not cattle prodding yourself into change all the time. You're able to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't do things exactly how I wanted to, but that's okay. To your point earlier around prepping for running, you don't know if this process that you're building out is fully going to work, but you do know that there will be a laundry list of positive things that you can pull from
Mm-hmm.
this trial and error science experiment as you prep for running, which is key. That's living in a resourceful state of mind as opposed to being like, well, I'm only going to count this as a successful endeavor if it works exactly the way that I want it to, and it helps
Right.
do the exact thing I want it to do for me. So that's powerful, man. So you provided a lot of really in-depth context around a lot of the deeper ahas as far as not just knowing these things conceptually, but integrating them on an identity level. I can feel that in the amount of confidence you have, especially existing in the spaces that you exist in, right? Like you're hanging out
Yes.
in worlds that most people, understandably so, would look at and be like, how on earth is that possible? How is that possible that he can travel and still not just lose weight, but have all these positive indicators of progress when it comes to his deep health, right? The root system. So
Mm-hmm.
looking in, say, the complete 180-degree direction, like where do you think you would be right now if you had not joined Megan and myself and implemented some of these kind of more mental and lifestyle related shifts?
Yeah. So I I mean, so I can see where I was coming from, and and I think I would not only be where I was, but I would have well, I would have gotten worse. don't know if we use the phrase worse or not. I would have drifted further from my goals, maybe.
Right,
But,
right.
so, I mean, during COVID, I gained 25 pounds, maybe something like that. And I have successfully lost that and more. I do not think I would have achieved that. I think my physical activity would be extremely inconsistent, especially with all the travel I do.
Mhm.
And I just I don't see myself as having had having had. I don't think I would have had the skills to understand and rise above the challenges that are associated with I mean, and this is going to be true for almost everybody who listens, but I have an extremely stressful lifestyle. My job is very demanding, carry a lot of responsibility, and I also love it. It's a great job for me. I'm so delighted to have this job. And there are so many things about this job that in the past would have completely tripped me up. In fact, I can look back on similar kinds of things and I can totally see, oh yeah, I took that job and I gained 10 pounds. I took that
Mhm.
job and all my physical activity just completely washed out.
Right.
So again, I feel like I can state quite confidently that I would have continued to gain weight. I would be doing less activity. And you certainly know, and I suspect the other people who may be watching this know, when you stop doing activity, then doing activity becomes aversive and it just becomes all the harder to get up and do things.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's where I think I also think my emotional eating would, if anything, again, have gotten worse. Um, my self-care, my self-confidence would have totally plummeted, probably even worse than they already were.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
It's real stuff, man, especially as you're, and thank you for sharing again, by the way, like it,
yeah,
especially as you're talking about whether most people are able or willing to acknowledge it or not, how much of a catalyst the pandemic was
oh
for,
yeah,
right? Where we talk about it a lot and working together as far as like what kind of compounding interest do you want to build for yourself? And
mm-hmm,
that when we're building a level of mindfulness in our health and fitness approaches, that also is very relevant to acknowledging the kind of compounding interest we have built in a negative sense when it comes to why momentum or building momentum around exercise or healthy eating is difficult, right? Because it's not
mm-hmm,
just the external act of moving your body, an external act of prepping food, like exercise and nutrition, which represents the physical domain of what
mm-hmm,
we call deep health, actually only makes up 14% of what's really
right,
necessary to get to where you want to go. So you're really talking about how there's been, again, going to that term, there's been this investment in the inside out approach that's allowed you to acknowledge, okay, these are the patterns that I've had leading up to this point in time, being able to take a
mm-hmm,
mindful, compassionate inventory of that and piece out what is worth keeping and let go of what is no longer serving you, right?
right,
Which that's really the most important thing.
mm-hmm,
So, as we conclude here, Erik, a lot of I'm sure you've experienced it in some way, shape, or form. I know a lot of people in our community will experience where they're on the fence, right? They've got this awareness as far as like there's a problem. They need to reach out for support because they could see the negative compounding interest, whether it's within something they see their parents or their family members or their friends going through, or even something that they see slowly building up for
mm-hmm,
themselves. So, like for anybody watching that's on the fence about reaching out for help and getting some of the greater amount of integration and solving their own deeper health issues and joining, what would be your encouragement or words of advice for them?
yeah. So it's a it's a really good question about what uh, what to share with people about reaching out for help and all that. And I want to start by acknowledging how difficult it is to reach out for help. And there are many, many things that go into that. And I think that on top of those many, many things that are involved in reaching out to help for anything, I think that so many of us have encountered a physical fitness industry that was really very judgmental and very demanding. Like, this is how we do it. You will come to my extra booty kick-ass fitness class and you will,
Right.
and doesn't doesn't um, mold itself to what the client needs. In this case, we're the clients, what the person needs. And so, on top of all the other things that make it hard for us to reach out to help, there, so many of us will have had experience with that kind of physical fitness industry. And I also think there's something really profound about, for lack of a better word, admitting that you need help with, your physical, whether that's physical weight wise, physical nutrition, physical activity. I mean, we're talking about something that there's so much shaming of in our
Mhm.
culture. You're too fat, you're too slow, you're too whatever.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard. And I think what I would encourage people to do is recognize the courage that they have already expressed just by even thinking about, you know, or maybe recognizing, I think I could use some help. And then to even be exploring options. I think that takes a lot of courage, and people need to give themselves credit for that.
Right.
Um, and then, I mean, the other thing I will say, but don't let it go to your head or Megan's head, is you guys are really easy to work with. I mean, you make it clear, you're very non-judgmental, that you're trying to meet people where they are, as opposed to saying, this is our workout scheme and you have to meet us
Right.
where our workout scheme is. And so, you know, I think I think the two of you make it very easy because you're accepting, you're non-judgmental, you're super duper flexible. I mean, and you're looking for the wins that people have had. I mean, I've been so busy lately, I haven't had a chance to participate in a lot of the group calls, but really consistently across all those group calls, it was very much, hey, recognize what you achieved this week as opposed to the places you didn't get
Right.
to where you wanted to get. Um, so, and I'll tell you, I'm one of those people who has trouble reaching out for help. I mean, I'm an oldest brother of 5 kids. That is not my role in the family. And still, yeah, so pat on the back for me,
Yeah.
to have also done this. But, again, recognize it's hard, give yourself credit for the courage to even be asking these questions. And I feel like you and Megan have made it really easy, both for me to engage in this process and for me to be really honest with you all when I have struggled. And as you and Megan know, I have struggled a lot with stuff. Um, so yeah, that would be my long-winded advice to people.
No, it's all good, man, and thank you for it. It's Megan and I fully receive everything that you're sharing, and by all means, it's come as a result of trial and error, at least on my part, in adopting that very, very outdated paradigm of coaching where it's very coach centered, it's very shame centered, and it got to a point where it's like, man, my clients aren't getting to where they want to go. And if they are getting to where
Yeah.
they want to go, it's this really stressful experience. And a lot of that
Uh-huh.
is a reflection of my own journey, right? Of navigating, okay, I knew what it was like to use shame as a fuel source and constantly pick apart all the things that I did wrong. And when we're going back to that kind of mental dynamic of keeping ourselves in a resourceful state, that doesn't keep people in a resourceful state. And
Right.
when it comes to, and that ties into working with people in person, it was a huge aha and acknowledging the workouts are important. However, there's 23 hours of the day that the real
Yep.
change is happening. And those represent
Yep.
those times that you're talking about where things don't go as well as you would have wanted them to go. And then you're worrying about going to your coach and actually talking to them about, hey, this happened in my world and it didn't go
Uh-huh.
as well as I wanted to. And I'm actually not sure how to do better in that same or similar circumstance next time around. So it's very much this process of just holding space. It's like we're all
Yeah.
living, our own version of a human experience. And the more flexible we can be and the more open we can be, free of judgment, it demystifies making mistakes. So then you, in this
Uh-huh.
case, you're able to see those mistakes as opportunities just to collect data. And then hopefully as time goes on, there's a level of excitement and play that comes from that. You're just like, oh, cool. Like I've got more info. I can make tweaks. And then the window of time
Uh-huh.
you exist in those lower frequency states of frustration, anger, whatever it might be, is so much shorter because
Yeah.
of this
Oh,
this
yeah.
this kind of work.
Well, you said a couple of things I want to highlight there. One is finding play.
Yep.
Like, I think so many of us, at least in my past, are so intense about our activity goals, our workout goals, that we lose the play, the
Yep.
playful element. And then the other thing I want to highlight is that, then another really cool thing about working with you is that because you come from a background where you were the traditional trainer and that can be harsh and you're pushing people and all that, and you recognize that that wasn't an effective approach and you sought a different way of achieving these goals. I mean, that is also like if you hadn't had that past, I think it would make you less effective as a coach now.
Sure.
But you have that past.
Yeah.
So,
It's totally valid, man. Because it wasn't just a one-sided thing where I was seeing my clients were having success. I was also realizing I was becoming fucking exhausted. Because it's like
oh
I
yeah,
it was
yeah.
taking
Because
a
what's feeding you if you're
right.
doing that?
Yeah, because it was like, man, I'm really tired of coaching this way. And this was the rub to an extent, and part of the reason why I decided to leave the mainstream fitness industry and coach the way that Megan and I coach online was I was also getting tired and fatigued and exhausted in many ways of clients expecting me to coach them that way and wanting me to
Uh-huh.
coach them that way because
Yeah.
that's all they knew. And to your point earlier, it can create this state of over control, and it almost creates this relationship with exercise and eating where it becomes very neurotic. Like
Uh-huh.
it's very, very overbearing. And like that's not what this is about, especially when you factor in having a job, traveling, raising a family, having kids, all the fluidity of life. It's like that pushes you into a state of having to be willing to adopt playfulness because then
Yeah.
you pivot in the moment, and that's minute by minute, second by second, moment by moment. So but yeah, it came as a result of a lot of trial and error on my end for sure.
Uh-huh. I'm sure. I'm sure. And we benefit from that.
Yeah, that's how it goes, man. So
You should do this for a living, man.
I know something like that. We're trying. Um, well, cool, Eric. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
These client spotlights interviews so much fun is because it can help kind of shake up the existing paradigm around how people think fitness and a healthy life should be, and help normalize the kind of conversations we need to have in order, in your case and for other individuals' cases, to help them get to where they want to go and actually nurture a healthy relationship with themselves, a healthy relationship with exercise, a healthy relationship with pivoting, so that way on their way to their goal they're
Mm-hmm.
fostering a deeper sense and skill set of just having fun along the way. Because then
Yeah.
get to your goal, it stops becoming this process of, oh, I'll give myself permission to be happy when I get to my goal. And it's more so a matter of like, no, I'm going to give myself permission to be happy now on my way to my goal. So that way,
Right.
getting to your goal is just icing on the cake. You still have the
Hmm.
base of the cake that you've already put the right ingredients into.
Right.
So,
All right.
well, cool, man. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
In closing, is there any final words or words of wisdom or golden nugget ahas that you would like to leave our audience with?
I think there are so many I could talk about. We'd be here for another hour, but you and I have other things we got to do. So,
Sounds good.
and
Well, with that being
thank you.
said, it'll be watch the replay, and then if you have questions, reach out to us. But Eric, again, thank you so much for your
I
time.
will. My pleasure.
All right, catch
All
you soon.
right.